you for joining us for today's webinar, Discipline in Distress Situations, brought to you by the President's Council. My name is Erica Pinnock, and I am the Executive Director of the President's Council. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the President's Council website. We also encourage and welcome the opportunity to connect via phone, email, and web chat. Today's expert presenter is Ann Ritchie, Venture Partner at Jumpstart, and coaches clients in preparing and executing growth plans. She has an extensive background in finance and banking with a unique experience of working with distressed businesses. Resourceful and collaborative, Ann approaches growth opportunities with tactical, creative, and innovative strategies. Today, Ann will lead us in discussion around two key topics: immediate and short-term responses to COVID-19 and how to evaluate options for the business. Ann, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Erica. Again, this is Ann Ritchie. Good morning. We're here for Discipline in Distress Situations. I think we have in total about 60 minutes. I'll probably go for 20 or 25 minutes and be available for questions, and then resume after if there aren't any questions. I really welcome questions because I think at a time like this, entrepreneurs get very isolated, and it's always good to have interaction and other people's viewpoints. I want to be careful to deliver what was advertised. We've all been on those webinars that deviate from what was advertised, and you're kind of like, why was I tuned in here? So I will cover the immediate and short-term responses to COVID, how to evaluate some options. Then we'll go to questions, and then I will end with how to plan for an exit. If it's too early or too painful for you to think about an exit, feel free to hang up and deal with that when you get there. No offense there. So my background is in banking. As Erica said, I was a banker for 20 plus years. Banking to me is more than an occupation. It's kind of a mindset. It's something that even though I'm no longer in banking, you kind of never lose that banking mindset, for better or worse. But don't imagine your nightmare of a banker sitting in a suit in an office, too quiet office somewhere. I have never made new loans as a banker. I always worked in workouts, and workouts are the area of the bank that handles loans that don't perform. So sometimes they don't perform because there's a shift in the industry, or they lose a customer, or sometimes they just, the management makes a mistake and doesn't pivot fast enough. But maybe 30% of the loans go back to the original area they came from. Another 30% would be restructured, and then maybe another 40 would be liquidated. So I've done a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of liquidations, and just seen a lot of mistakes in a lot of situations and how people react to the situations. For me, it was a very creative position because it's all upside. All the bad things have happened before the loan gets transferred to me. So I really enjoyed that part of banking. And again, it provided an excellent background for helping companies. So after I left banking, I spent 2 years as a chief financial officer for a jet airline parts manufacturer in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That was also a turnaround situation. And then after that, I was done with turnarounds, and I went on to Jumpstart, helping companies grow, usually with a financial lens on, but working with strategy and then referring them to other resources if needed. So briefly, my stint as a chief restructuring officer and chief financial officer was in 2008, which was also a very, very difficult time. It was a private equity-backed company, and the owner sold me on, he said it was a 50-50 chance of turnaround. It was really more like 80-20. Ended up liquidating that company. We did get the bank out whole, but it was a lot of lessons learned and a lot of scars, frankly. But I think what I did learn from that, which is different than what's happening now, is, 2008, a lot of people saw it coming. Everybody was in the same situation, and the climb out of it was a little more linear. I think with what's happening now, it's, you have everything you had in 2008, and then you layer on the trauma and the emotion of the health issues and the deaths and the lack of direction, you know, from your state and local governments. So I personally think it's a much harder time right now. There was no warning. It happened to some very quickly. And also, it's not going to be a linear path out. There's going to be starts and stops. And so I think as entrepreneurs, it's a much harder journey this time. But it's also a time when good things can come out of situations. So one theme that I have when I coach my entrepreneurs is I kind of look at it in 3 phases. It's the 3 Ps: panic, pivot, and progress. And I think entrepreneurs have to go through each phase. You don't want to stay too long in any of them, and you kind of can jump back and forth. You can get out of panic mode, get into pivot mode, and then when the pivot doesn't work, you kind of go back to the panic mode. Panic is kind of in the very beginning. Hopefully everyone listening is moving out of the panic stage, but you know, you're frozen and you can't move, or you start running so fast towards a target and you don't even know where you're going. In the pivot mood, this will be my only sports analogy because I don't do sports analogies for the most part, but you know, the important part of the pivot is keeping that one foot on the ground. And so you know your businesses, you know your industry, and you know your customer, and you got to keep that foot on the ground, but you got to keep moving around with the other foot because there's something around every corner, good and bad. And then progress is the exciting part, and it offers the most hope and the opportunity for real success. I think if you look back to 2008, there's a lot of innovation that occurs in distressed times. Gallup, I think, had a poll that says only 1% of the population is really hardwired to be entrepreneurs. So you are that 1%. And so the innovation and the growth and the progress that happens is going to happen because you all are in the trenches and you're opportunistic, or you wouldn't have gotten as far as you do. So again, you don't want to stay too, don't stay too long in the panic mode, or you'll definitely be out of business. Don't pivot too long because pivot requires one foot on the ground and you've got to be more nimble, but really try in the quiet times to embrace the opportunity and see what's next and how your business can grow or change in this time. So
And I have a question.
yep.
So you talk about pivoting and maximizing opportunities. You and I spoke right before starting the webinar. How do entrepreneurs sort of release themselves for the opportunity to do joint ventures? How do they say now's the time to look at how I join with another, what I may have previously seen as a competing organization in this same industry, and join together so that we can both sustain and grow into something new?
You know, I think that that I'm going to skip through because I think that's a really good point. I think the first thing you have to do is you've got to do that inventory, and you've got to say, you've got to have that hard conversation about what didn't I see coming? Why didn't I see coming? What happened? Sorry, what happened? What was happening before that I should have taken care of? And so, did you enter the situation of COVID strong or weak? And I think those kind of discussions with yourself will lead you to really looking in the mirror and saying, I probably can't thrive the way I am in this environment and I need to change. So I think once you get to that point, then you start really assessing your customers and say, do they need me? Do they still need me? And what are my competitors doing and where are my competitors? A lot of situations are there's 10 of you and at the end there's only going to be 2. And part of making sure you're one of the 2 is looking at the other 8 and saying, what assets do we have that we can share, and what's the path forward? I know, I think a lot of us go into business to be sole entrepreneurs, and we want our name on the front and we want a retail location, but there's so many business models that have more collaborative efforts where everybody doesn't have a retail location. So, you know, if there's 5 struggling restaurants, can there be 1 thriving restaurant with 5 different food themes? Or, you know, 1 physical location, 1 kitchen where all those food things can prosper. So I think the first step, Erica, is to really, really have that tough decision about whether you can continue with your current business model. And once the faster you get to that, the sooner you'll start seeing opportunities. Because one thing, time is never on your side in a crisis. And I think it can be very, very crippling to make decisions. And so in those situations, I recommend that if you can't decide today whether to lay off your employees, pick the date when you need to decide. That could be a week, that could be 2 weeks, but pick the date when you are going to make the decision, and then make it on that point, on that day. Because the time that goes by, you lose opportunities, especially when you think of the possibilities of collaborating or combining or doing a joint venture with someone. So I've jumped around a little bit, but thank you for that question. I want to present 3 methods of decision-making in crisis times. And these are 3 different approaches, and they might, hopefully one of them will appeal to you. The first one I call is the kind of the food chain. And I think probably most of you have been through that phase, but it's really saying the first week or 2 weeks or maybe months saying, okay, where do I sit on the food chain? In my customers, suppliers, financiers, who's stronger than I am and who's weaker than I am. So in the case of most businesses, their employees are in a weaker position from them. And I encourage everyone to take care of your employees. And when I say take care of, it doesn't necessarily mean paying them for the next 6 months if you don't have the cash, but it's really focusing on their needs and how you can help them in this crisis. Even if you can't pay them, you can refer them to customers. You can refer them to suppliers. You can ask them if they could go part-time. You can ask them if they could take a salary cut and defer, but it's really helping the people lower on the food chain than you, and then leaning on the people that are up the food chain from you. There's been a lot of concessions made by banks to landlords and property owners. So they're in a position where they can be leaned on by you, and they can make accommodations because they're getting accommodations from the banks. So rushing to pay people who are higher on the food chain to the detriment of your employees, I don't think is a good idea. So it's kind of assessing where you are, and again, taking care of those that are lower than you are, and really leaning on stronger companies or partners. The second method of decision-making is really it's a bankruptcy concept, and it starts with identifying your critical vendors. So in bankruptcy, there's an official critical vendor list that you submit to the court. But in this situation, it's just really sitting down and saying, who's critical to my survival? And you list them, you list what you owe them, and you prioritize them, and you start there. You can't make all decisions the same day and at the same time, but in terms of your critical vendors, who do you need to, in the next few days, to continue your business if you're able to? If you're not able to, who do you still need? You know, insurance is important at this time. Again, taking care of your employees. Landlord may or may not be on that list, but certainly deserves a call. The third method of crisis decision-making that I recommend, and this is a little more technical, but it's really looking at your operating leverage. And all operating leverage is the extent to which your costs are fixed or they're variable. And in crisis situations, your goal should be to move as many expenses out of the fixed bucket and into the variable bucket. And, depending on your level of financial sophistication, some of these terms may or may not resonate with you, but the concept of the fixed expenses are, they don't change with volume. So you could have sales of $2 or sales of $1 million, and you're still going to have those fixed expenses. What you want to do is you want to try to change some of those to variables. So for example, rent is usually a fixed cost. You pay the same amount of rent whether you have a really strong month or whether you have a weaker month. Rent is an example where you could call your landlord and say, hey, I can't make this fixed rent for the next 3 months because of the uncertainty. Would you be willing to accept a percentage of revenues? Another example might be your suppliers. If you've gotten some inventory that you can't sell because your retail location is closed, you can approach your suppliers and say, can I pay you for these as I sell them and give you 50% of what I normally would have given you? That way, again, it lowers the fixed cost and it allows you to go forward without having those large outlays of fixed costs. I think in general, we get nervous about negotiating and asking people for something less than what we owe them contractually. But I think in these times when you communicate and you make them a partner, I think people are more willing to work with you. So when you call your landlord and say, I can't pay you the rent, but I'm willing to pay you 5% of whatever I bring in, to some extent, you make your problem a little bit of their problem. And it's that knitting together of relationships that, in my experience, has separated people who succeed from people who fail. It's bringing other people communicating enough to bring other people into your problem set, because they also have ideas as well. A lot of landlords have been in the business a long time. They've seen a lot of retailers come and go. They are a great source of information on retail businesses. The same thing with your banker. Banks have been given a lot of flexibility now and a lot of resources to help small businesses. And so it's up to you to exercise that option and call your banker and say, I can't make this payment, but I will make it, I'll pay half of my monthly payment if my sales reach a certain number. So again, that's a third way to try to start making some decisions very early on. I hesitate, I told all my clients, go for all the money you can get, apply for the PPP, apply for the disaster loan, apply for grants, and don't worry in the beginning whether you are going to get them or whether you qualify. The PPP is a 1% loan. That's unprecedented. To the extent that you get it and you, for some reason, decide to shut down and don't need it, you can always pay it back early, or you can pay it back over time and use the 1% for your next venture if it ends up that loan is not forgivable. I think the concept of taking on debt at this point in time is very frightening, but you don't want to make decisions in the short term that are going to preclude you from succeeding long term. So kind of my last point on the immediate short-term responses, I really suggest that you make sure you don't foreclose opportunities with decisions you make in the short term, hasty decisions. You might say, I can't pay my insurance. And so you miss an insurance payment and then you have a loss. And then you can't recover from the loss on top of the COVID. If you can't pay your insurance, call your bank. If you have a bank relationship and you have a loan, a lot of banks will force place insurance. Now that I'm not a banker, I can tell all my bankers' secrets, but they are not going to want you to have your building or your equipment or their inventory uninsured. And so it's just a matter of calling your bank and communicating with them that you're unable to make the insurance. And 9 times out of 10, if they hold it as collateral, they will pay for the insurance on that. Other things are, laying off employees too quickly or laying them off in a way where they're not willing to come back. I think that the irreparable harm that can be done here is reputation, and reputation is hard to get back. So as you make these decisions, a lot of times it's the how, even if the decision is not welcomed by the person that you're communicating with. I think you really have to protect your reputation and your integrity in how you handle yourself during this time. I say negotiate everything. I don't think there's anything in this environment that's off the table. You have to be bold enough to ask, and you have to pivot if they say no, you got to keep coming back with maybe a different twist, really trying to understand what's behind their decision to say no to what you originally suggested. There's tons of courses or online resources about negotiations. I think the two things that I keep front of mind is usually you're not only negotiating with someone one time. And so I really encourage entrepreneurs to remember that it's not a single negotiation, it's a series of small negotiations that build a relationship. And so the way you carry yourself in that first negotiation dictates the second one. I'll tell a little story. I was negotiating a union contract for 300 employees when I was at the Harrisburg plant. And I was all excited and I was all ready and had all my points, and I was really gonna go in there strong and aggressive. And we did, and we got a lot of concessions, and it worked out. I think we got most of the points we wanted, but 2 years later, sitting in front of the same people negotiating, and it was very difficult because of the way the prior negotiation had gone. And so we lost a lot on the second one because the first one was not, there wasn't trust built in the negotiation. I think when you do negotiate, it doesn't have to be cutthroat. It can be pleasant and collaborative, and it does not have to be someone winning, because again, there's going to be another negotiation behind that. And then the other recommendation is just to ask big and try to support your ask with numbers. I think I've had entrepreneurs that have called me and they're like, oh yeah, we'll be back online in a month. And without trying to burst their bubble, I just say, okay, why don't you go meditate and call me back in a couple of days, because this is not a 1 month or a 2 month situation here. This is probably a 6 month, 9 month, 18 month before you rebound from the type of sales loss that most businesses will experience. And that's not all, but most of them. So it's really think longer term than you want to. So if you're looking out, you're asking your landlord for concessions for 2 months, I would double it or triple it. Sometimes it's better to come with a big ask and have them come back with a smaller counter than to have to keep going every month in front of your landlord, because it can reduce your credibility. And again, in these times, you can say, here's what I'm asking for and here's why, and you can show them some financial analysis. And then if you need to come back and ask for more, you have a template and you can show them, yeah, I gave you these numbers, but these are the two things that didn't go the way I thought they would go. It shows that you did the analysis even though there was a miss. So that's those are my recommendations for the short-term immediate responses. Now going on to evaluating the options for your business, which is what the question really related to. I think this is a great time for, once you get out of crisis mode or extreme crisis mode, to really revisit your why and really drill down on what your customers want, what they value, and what they do. I have a series of about 40 questions that I ask clients to look at about their customers. Where have your customers been? Are they sitting at home waiting with their hair growing and their eyebrows becoming untamed? Are they sitting there waiting for you to come back into business, or have they found other alternatives? I think people are available now, and so just picking up the phone and talking to your customers, even if you're in retail, if you have a database and you can call 2 or 3 customers a day to see where they are, it's, you know, you can get disconnected from your customers at times like these, but it's actually the time to be more connected, and opportunities will come out of that, out of those discussions. So maybe they found an alternative to their hair care, but you hear something else that they now need. For example, if they're doing their own hair at home, maybe they now need supplies and product to do that. And that could be a need that you could fulfill on the interim basis. But it's really, I mean, you don't want to wake up 6 months from now and say, where did my customers go? If they left, you want to know where they go, where they went, and what solutions they came up with to work around you not being available to provide the product or service that you did for them. If you have customers on the other side, you have a business. It's a matter of figuring out, is the new way of doing business so damaging to your margins that you can't make a profit? Again, if your customers are there and willing to buy from you, and your margins can handle a little shaving because you have to shorten your hours or have more protective equipment or whatever it is, then you probably will survive. If your margins were thin and your customers are dispersing, you really need to rethink your why and the value that you can offer. And that analysis should take you, it should take you to the solution that is either try to push forward through this or pivot and do something else. Tools for projecting the likelihood of your survival, again, I think is that extreme, intense customer analysis, down very granular. Where do they go? What are they doing? Are they gonna still be willing to pay for my product or service? Are they gonna be willing to pay more for my product or service? Are they gonna want it done in a different way? Is it gonna be done remotely? What service changes do I need to make to still capture that dollar of customers? The obvious is if your customers are completely gone, then you probably do not have a chance. That's an easy decision to make. On the other hand, if your customers, if you're a mask maker, then your customers have probably grown, your number of customers have grown, and the amount that your existing customers are grown, and that's a no-brainer. In between is the hard part. I recommend starting with a cash flow projection, 13 weeks, go out 3 months, and then go out a year, and really put down on paper what you think it will look like going forward. Again, really focusing on that revenue line. And when you project revenues, make sure you project quantity and price. I think a lot of people just say, oh, my revenues are going to fall 20%, or they're going to fall, or they're going to grow 15%. But is that a 15% price increase? Is it 15% growth in the number of customers you have? Or is it a 15% growth in the amount your existing customers buy? Those are 3 completely different scenarios, and the costs related to those scenarios are very different. If you have to go out and find 15% new customers, that's a lot of marketing. If you have to raise your prices 15%, that works, but it doesn't work year after year. So I encourage entrepreneurs, as part of the process of figuring out the likelihood of survival, really, really getting granular with your projections. And again, quarterly projections at this point won't do it. Monthly probably won't do it. You probably have to start with weekly projections. Another thing I encourage entrepreneurs, I've asked a lot of them, would they do it again? And, you know, a lot of them have been honest and said they wouldn't. And then they immediately respond, but I can't stop now, or I can't close now because I have to meet these obligations. There's a concept called sunk cost. It's, you know, you can Google it, but you never want to make a decision to continue your business because you feel you can't stop, or there's one large liability that you've got to keep working to pay. I think at that point you need to kind of reassess and say, how do I deal with that bank loan or lease? Because I know I'm not going to be profitable going forward, as opposed to just keep on the treadmill thinking that something's going to change. What usually happens in those scenarios is the hole gets deeper and you just keep digging it deeper and you're even more unable to meet the obligation that you were trying to pay in, with good intentions to meet your obligations. It's a good time to look back, figure out what was wrong before, and really try to assess how the cost of business has changed, of doing business has changed. And this is going to be, that's an unfolding script, because there's going to be more restrictions and regulations, especially if you're in a retail business. The fun part is kind of once you get past the panic and the pivot, the fun part is the progress, and it's not about thinking outside the box anymore. There really is no box. And so as you talk to your customer, just bringing that creativity and saying, dreaming a little bit and saying, I was talking to a salon owner last night and I was like, well, she was dreading having to cut hair and do hair with all of her protective equipment on. And I was like, well, what about if you design protective equipment and you really made it part of your customer experience, where it didn't feel like they were in a hospital, but it felt like they were still in a salon in a very pampered way. I have a company that does physical therapy, and their business is way down. And I suggested, hey, maybe you approach hospitals and say, all the in-hospital therapy, can I take that over for the time being, since people are not going to hospitals due to Corona? And that could last for the duration of Corona, and it could last beyond that, because people still need their therapy, but they're probably going to be very hesitant to go to therapy that's housed in a hospital setting. So I'm going to take a quick pause and to see if there are questions before we move on to the how to plan for an exit.
Yes, we do have a question from Beth Price, and Beth indicates she's a child care business owner, and they are highly dependent on government to decide when and how to reopen. Is it difficult to do any projections, and do you have advice for them?
Yeah, that's one of, childcare is tough anyways, because you have all the regulations on top of the new regulations related to COVID. I assume that you're completely shut down now, so you've probably been through the first part of what I talked about, which is saying, I'm getting no revenue. What costs do I need to cover? You guys have certifications in childcare that you have to maintain certain things. I would make sure that you do everything you can to make sure that you're meeting all the certification requirements and the renewals. And if you can't, there's nothing wrong with calling Ohio Department of Job and Family Services and say, I can't keep this training up for my teachers because they're not here. Really lean on them to come up with solutions as to how you cover those expenses while you're gone. And then I think, childcare needs have not changed. So there will be a need when you're done. It's a matter of how long you can last until then. So I would do your projections based on, what do I need to keep the opportunity open, my certifications, my landlord, whatever, utilities, insurance, and then do 3 scenarios. This is things open up in August, things open up in September, and things open up in December. You probably are going to have a lot of costs related to how those children are cared for and drop off. So you might want to start thinking about how you reconfigure your business. The good thing is, ODJFS is not going to have all the answers. So to the extent that you can strategize and bring recommendations to them, I think that would be beneficial, and it would also keep your pulse on how these regulations are coming down. Childcare is a really, it's a thin margin business, especially if you're taking children that are paid by the government, but on the other hand, it's not disappearing. In the interim, there might be opportunities to see if you can provide daycare for some of the healthcare workers, if you're located near a facility, or try to become a drop-off for some of the food, just to stay active while you're not open. Are you guys open at all?
Beth, you can open your mic.
Okay, I got a PPP, so I am paying my staff and they are interacting with the families and the children. So no, we're not physically open, but yes, we are doing some semblance of education for the kids.
Do you get any reimbursement for that?
We are getting some reimbursement from the county, from the state. So we do get some, but obviously not enough to pay everybody.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think that's one of the industry where there's going to be, you know, out of 10, there's going to be 5 that survive, and the 5 are going to be very busy because of the higher census that's moved over. And so, you know, maybe there's opportunities for you to figure out whether you're going to be one of the, you know, which side you're going to be on, and really partner with other childcare. If you're, you know, if your census was at 60% to begin with, or 50%, maybe there's an opportunity to get that census up by working with some other providers.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And you're talking a lot about forecasting, and a lot of this requires the services of a professional. What are your recommendations for businesses that don't have those dollars right now to get that assistance and do those types of assessments that you're recommending?
So on the, you know, I think if you have QuickBooks, you can print out your, I mean, the easy way to do it is just to print out your income statement and go line by line and really dig deep and say, what happens to this line item under these different scenarios? You can throw it in a spreadsheet. Scenario planning is really, really important. I don't think there's any scenario where things are reopened and back to normal before 6 or 8 months in any business, even if you aren't a retailer. And so you want to do 2 or 3 scenarios, but I would just take your, you know, hopefully if you can use Excel, if not, you could theoretically do it manually, but just go line by line and figure out what are the things you have to pay and what are the things you can defer on your income statement. And then start throwing some assumptions in about when your revenue is going to come back and how it's going to come back. Is it going to come back? Daycare, I would assume, will probably come back. For example, once it's back, it'll come back near the levels that it was because people still have that need. On the other hand, it could be that people are working at home a lot and don't have that need to bring their kids somewhere. And so you'd kind of want to do 2 scenarios. There are resources, you know, Jumpstart, some of the business growth collaborative organizations can help with that. But I think if you know your business and you know how your costs move, it's just sitting down with your income statement and going line by line to project.
How are other business owners on the line sort of thinking ahead in terms of what their new normal operating procedures will be? Does anyone want to share?
Okay, so now's the part, the exit part. So, and I will preface it by saying, again, to me, entrepreneurs find ways to progress even in really hard times. And so when I say how to plan for an exit, it's not a death, it's just moving on to your next opportunity taking the skills that you learn doing what you used to do and doing something else with it. So I think the key is trying to maximize your opportunity and minimize your damages. First and foremost, above anything else, is protecting your reputation. And that's in everything you do. That's in the way you communicate with people you can't pay. That's the way you communicate with your customers, that you're not going to be able to service them, and your suppliers as well. Everyone will be used to financial hardship now, but it's kind of the way you carry yourself in these times will dictate how easy it is to do something else. And so when I say maximize opportunities, really thinking about what value can you preserve. Sometimes there's value in your hard assets that you don't realize. You know, there's equipment that you can sell. There's relationships that you can broker. So to the extent that you find your customers a new solution, or you find your employees a new opportunity, or you find your suppliers new relationships, all those things will minimize your damage going forward. Again, negotiation is key here. So if you're stuck with a lot of inventory, rather than sell it off and not pay the supplier, you can say, I'm going to sell this and give you a percentage. Or I've seen situations where suppliers will cover your rent long enough for you to sell their what they've sent to you, because it's of no use sending it back to them. So that would be a situation where you have custom inventory and you're not going to be able to send it back to the manufacturer because it has your name on it or it's built to your specification. You call your suppliers and you say, hey, can you, would you be willing to contribute to my rent or the storage of this long enough for me to sell it so that I can pay you off? Again, it's over communicating with those people that are critical to wind down your business. I caution people, there's no debtor's prison in the United States. So the worst thing that can happen to you is that you can't pay your bills and perhaps you have to file bankruptcy. But large companies have done it. They're going to do it this time and they're going to rebound. And so I think small businesses, especially ones where you've given personal guarantees, you get very emotionally tied in and you make those decisions become harder. But again, this is a time when there's going to be a lot of business failures. And so to the extent that you have some portion of your business that you can preserve, it could be one customer relationship that is very valuable and still needs you. To the extent that you hand that to a competitor in a very organized manner, that opens up an opportunity for you. And sometimes the opportunity is going to work for a competitor, bringing with you some customers and maybe some other employees. And again, that minimizes your damage. Maybe you come into that relationship as a partner as opposed to an employee. But again, trying to keep those opportunities open. So in terms of planning for the exit, I think you start with a list of your assets, and it's not always physical assets. It could be relationships that are assets. And then you figure out how to maximize those, and you look at your liabilities and see which ones you can negotiate out of easily. I always recommend paying your employees and in paying all of their payroll taxes, because that is something that's very hard to get off of your credit report if you've held withholding taxes. And again, banks will have their procedures for how you deal with their defaulted obligations. But I always encourage you to pay employees and make sure they're taken care of. And, banks have concessions and they will work with you if you communicate with them. A secret to banks is they are always open to writing off and getting a lump sum rather than dragging something out. They usually do not want to take back the collateral. So if you can be a good steward of the collateral and, for example, stay in the building even if you're not able to pay the rent, but you keep the heat on and you keep people from breaking into it, that's a value to the bank that will get you a lower payoff. So that's kind of the high level, how to plan for an exit. And that's about all I have, but I have, if you have any questions and you don't want to ask them now, Erica, President's Council, has my contact information, and I would be more than happy to talk to anyone that just needs someone to walk through ideas with. I think you get isolated at this time, and it helps to walk through and have a team that can help you make decisions.
Thank you, Anne, so much for the information. It was definitely useful. I hope we all are thinking about how do we sort of identify what our new messaging will be for each of our organizations. As we conclude this webinar, I again encourage and welcome each of you to contact the President's Council via email, phone, or the web, and a link to today's webinar along with the slide presentations and a direct link to the county's online stabilization fund, which we hope you all have utilized in applying for a grant, as well as Anne's information, as well as information to the President's Council's Excellence in Entrepreneurship program, which can help you with all of the resources that Anne spoke about. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with each of you soon. And have a great day and be safe.